winner of the RIA Gold Medal, and more recently honored as the Officer of the Order of Australia for his contribution to architecture. Rick is seminal to the defining of Australian architecture and its education today. Rick's lecture is titled Small Offerings, but I'm sure it will provide seeds of unlimited potential. Please all welcome Rick.
Thanks so much, Nina. Well, this talk is not about my own work. That's the first thing. But it's more about, I think, the things that I think are important to being an architect. And can you hear up the back? It's more about those sorts of things and what drives one. And, you know, in a world where technology is raging, and, you know, there's nothing you can do about that. It's just the way that we are. You know, we are turning ourselves into a whole series of specialists. You know, like, oh, I'm an urban designer, I'm an interior this, I'm a such and such and a such and such. And I think that's just a load of nonsense, because I think that the mind of a good architect can take in the breadth and the vision and the understanding of a city and come right down to the understanding that the ideal angle between the back and the seat is 104 degrees. You know, we have to be able to do and see and understand, I think, everything. So one would much prefer the title of being a design generalist and not a design specialist. And I think so it goes. So I thought that in the short time today, it just might be fun to go through with you some of the things that I find are really important, that make me personally wonder about things, because I think it's through the wondering that, that good work can occur. So nature, of course, for me personally comes first and foremost, although it's so closely tied with culture. So it's this nature and culture, but the phenomena of nature, particularly in this country, is one of our greatest assets, I think. And I personally can't live without that. Our little family lives in a very simple situation, but we are confronted by that all the time. And it drives one, in a way. There are some who are much more tied to issues of cities. But you know, when you see things like this, it makes you really think, not only about the way on why these great three thunderheads have occurred and why the temperature inversion has put that slice horizontally through that landscape, but as an architect and as an artist, you see the space that's involved in that and the light. And so you see these things and you register them in some way. Nina, I'm not sure how this works. I'll push that. There you go. It's a Luddite again.
Yeah,
Here we go.
that's
the one. That's fantastic, thanks. Easy, see? So, and this is occurring directly under those clouds. It's the whole pattern of the wind system of the deserts of Namibia. And you know that offshore there, they vacuum the diamonds off the seafloor. And naturally that big company, what's it called, the big company who runs the diamonds? No. Anyway, they've got it all under control. Like they search people who go in and out of the places and all. But this is the sea, the sand that runs down to the sea. The perfect formation and the shape of wind, which as architects we must understand. And structure in nature and landscape. You can look at this and you can say, well, what a wall. You can look at it and you can say, look, there's two stratas to the wall. You can look at it and you can say, well, look, the water has made all the indentations and therefore the fingers that are supporting it. You can look at it and you can say, there is an idealised form of rampart, that if you had to make a wall that is going to hold back the earth or whatever, you have a starting point here in a very beautiful way. So there's many ways of looking at it. And then there's the whole issue of the movement of water, of reticulation, of dendritic patterns that start from the headwaters, like the fine veins in the leaf of the tree, and finally come down to the trunk. That is the main body of the river on its inevitable and endless journey to the sea. I find these sorts of things fascinating. And then when you get it overlaid by culture, well, and you start to have things like this coming in, right? Much better than a laser pointer. When you get these systems crossing one another, then you get this frisson that's set up that makes you really think about issues of architecture and made things in very powerful landscapes, and cities and how they occur and why they occur. How more blessed could we be than to have such city walls as the ramparts to the city of Sydney and Newcastle? Just the most phenomenal elements for the entry. But then how beautifully and brilliantly Utzon saw this from the distance of Denmark without having visited, and using a navy chart that showed him all the perfect forms of the headlands and the depths under the water contours. And from that chart, he designed and made this amazing building. And as you can see very clearly, the platform of that building and the point of land of Bennelong Point is just an echo of that North Head profile that I just showed you. He understood perfectly. And my old teacher Masuda, the Japanese man, who always said that through the architecture the landscape emerges, I think that's such an insightful thing. Because when you walk on the platform of that opera house and you look up the harbour and down the harbour, you see the fingers and the bays of the harbour, and you understand absolutely the structure of the landscape of the city. Through that platform, the structure of the landscape emerges. It's such a wise saying. Utzon understood it so beautifully and so well. And so what happened in more ancient sorts of times, like 4,000, 3,000 years ago, in Ireland, they made this tomb inside this man-made hill. And there's only one room inside this hill. It would be 5 metres by 5 metres or 5 metres round. And it has one opening, due south. And on the lowest point of the sun every year, it shines right in that opening and lights the inner tomb. But what's interesting for me as well is to see the line and the profile of that hill, because that's studied. And they did things with a certain scale. It's called Hugh Grange. See, I think these are the timeless things. I think these are the sites like that wonderful, our wonderful poet, I've forgotten his name, I know him so well. Anyway, he just calls these places of perpetual dimension, Les Murray. Perpetual dimension, it's such a beautiful way of putting it, that time comes and goes. You know, when the Opera House packed up and Utzon was forced to leave the country, someone asked Steen Eiler Rasmussen, who was his old teacher in Denmark, little fella about this big, and he was hunched over, a very wise man, what should we do now? And he said, just leave it alone, don't touch it. I mean, who'd touch a painting of Picasso's that was half finished anyway? Leave it, he said. It'll become a place unto itself. And the concerts that you'll have in there will be very different from the symphony concerts that you would have in a completed building, but leave it. The entry, the opening. You see, everything is there. Nothing changes that much. And it takes us to the city. London, a valley or a wet plain, in fact, and a river that runs through it, it comes out to the sea. Where do cities begin? Where was the first step? You know, the origins and the beginning of things is the most important thing, I believe, for us to understand. Where does it first happen? What are the beginnings in things? Why is London London? Well, you know, fairly obviously, as soon as you look at that map and you see that all the flatland around here with its tributaries coming in, and the south part of England with its forests, and the north part more bare, and the need to cross from the south to the north, if you can control the river crossing, then you control everything. And so where do you put the point of crossing? You put the point of crossing where there's height on both sides, and its narrowness, and London Bridge is still there as the beginning of that city. And the reason I'm saying these things is that the properties that a city takes from its natural environment, from its landscape location, stays with it almost forever, despite what's happened to it. So when they discovered in Chelsea, for example, in London, that people had heavy chest complaints, they could never understand why, except somebody said, oh, they finally found out that it was 2 or 3 feet lower than anywhere else, and that was the dampest and the coldest place there. Properties of cities hang in because of where they were and are. Berlin. I mean, have you ever wondered why Berlin is this city of radicals? If you read Canetti's autobiography when he talks about Berlin in the 20s, everybody was there. You know, all the artists, all the ferment of the place. Well, Berlin actually means swamp. Lin is the suffix for Slavic cities and towns. Swamp town. And it didn't really start until about the 10th century, when these 2 higher levels of ground were finally populated and protected. But I believe that that place was a place where fugitives went from time immemorial, because it was hard to get into and hard to find people in there. Berlin has always been an island, mentally and physically. This is the starts of it. This is the 9th, 10th century of it. These 2 parts of Berlin are still there. They're the centre of the city where all the museums are. Embedded into its structure are its beginnings. Copenhagen, Kopen, trading, Hagen, harbour, trading harbour. But where did it actually start? Well, it started from a place called Gammelstraat, which means the old beach. And the old beach is where the Vikings pulled their boats up and traded their goods there. It's still there. It's in here, right in the very heart of the city. I mean, you could make a whole talk about Copenhagen, but I'm talking about the beginnings. Newcastle. Well, Newcastle. You look very carefully at James Fletcher Mental Hospital, because I think that's where it really started. And I think it started there also in Aboriginal terms as well, which I would have to check out a bit more thoroughly. But if you look at this map, and you know, as we all do, that Newcastle is basically a floodplain of the Hunter, then the high ground comes down through here, right? Here are the bowling greens, here's the walls of the city, here's James Fletcher, here's the courthouse, here's Watt Street leading right down to the Hunter, and right at the point where it kinks, if you look at the old maps, you'll find there were rocks there, and that's where, when we whitefellas came here, we set up our camp, I believe, over what would have been one of the original Aboriginal camps there. Because in the James Fletcher site, It has its back to the southerlies, protected by the westerlies. It would have had water. It would have had a prospect out over the Hunter River to see the mullet come in. Not only that, to move along the coastline here as the indigenous groups did, you would move through the high ground, not the low ground, and come down to that point there, and that's the narrow point which leads across to Stockton. It's where the railway station is. One station takes over another. We whitefellas put our first jetty there. We put our first camp there for the ordering of the soldiers, where so-called justice was carried out. And where are the courthouses? They're right here. It goes way back, and it's important to understand these things. Cape Town. Cape Town. Town. Cape. Cape of Good Hope. Cape Town, made famous and necessary, of course, by its harbour for the ships that were travelling the world. Not only that, they provisioned there and they were repaired there. Still in the middle of Cape Town is a great park now. The garden, the government garden. It's where all the vegetables and produce was made to give to the ships. And then, of course, is the harbour and so forth down here, where ships are still brought in for repair. And the great mountain, of course, behind it. But look, this is in the middle of Cape Town. These ships are pulled up literally into the streets of Cape Town. Fishing vessels, deep draft. But this is happening right in the middle of Cape Town. I mean, that's the life of a city. What stupid idiots we are in Sydney to have taken the industrial side out of our harbour. My God. And Newcastle's heading exactly the same way. You know, and I think we collectively should be responsible for saying, hang on, wait. And the other end of Cape Town is the Cape itself. Wow, what a place. I'll just show you these because they're so inspiring. The Cape of Good Hope, the Cape of Storms, where oceans of two different temperatures meet. What a place. Dutch and I visited there at dawn. And nearby there, the kelp beds and the shark cages and the sharks. I went down in one of those cages. I tell you, I have never been so frightened in all my life. And I got out super fast and I sat down on the deck, and there was a wonderful native fellow was on the boat like this, and he had tears running down his cheeks from laughter. And I was sort of like this. He said, "Oh man," he said, "this is only for the young fellas." But what creatures, 6 metres long, they were absolutely amazing. Look at these things as well, like inhabitations, things that inspire us about shelter, housing, how to use materials. The natural world is a real feast in these sorts of things. The weaver bird, right? Insulation, protection, everything, all rolled into one. Colour. You know, I was fortunate and I worked for Utzon for 1.5 years. And I remember being with him at one stage down in Bayview in Sydney, in Pittwater, and he heard a pheasant call up the back, this call, and his ears twitched up and he said, "Oh," he said, "colour." He said, "Colour," he said, "I've always been so weak in colour. Now," he said, "I'm studying the feathers of the birds." He said, "They have the most remarkable relationships, as do our trees and eucalypts in particular, and the movement and the change of the bark. If we want to study colour, I believe it's all here, or a lot of it's here. And look at the flare around that. Absolutely stunning. And corrugated iron rusting, culture in decline. And the patterns of foam on beaches. And this is the last remnants of a great ship that was built at Aotearoa in timber many, many years ago. All that's left is the top part of the rudder. What a symbol. And my mind goes back to that English author, name again that I've forgotten, who said, what else, or what is the beauty of a ruin? Or the beauty of the ruin is that it represents the last stages of an idea. Oh, that's such a nice way of looking at things. Time, decay, reported structure, and of course the photo is a symbol of Japan. And how much more beautiful that is than some sort of fibro sex box that's been made out in the western suburbs, or anywhere for that matter, that's got no reported structure on it at all. It could be a shoebox for all one cares. And here is a city in Japan that celebrates the change of season. And I just wanted to show you this because it is about the life of the city and a moment or a week in time. This is all happening every year, of course, and that this was happening at a time when Japan is absolutely on its back foot through that earthquake and then through the issue of nuclear disaster pending perhaps. Earthquakes, tidal waves, they can handle. They have been handling that for thousands of years, but nuclear issues, no. And so the whole country is culturally, I mean, it's on its back foot. But when the cherry blossom came out, they just forgot. Very proud owner. A set of fireproof doors. I'm coming down to a bit to the details of things. Look at those doors. Their reveals, lovely word, are stepped in 5 steps so as the fire can't get through. And white plaster which doesn't burn. This castle, Himeji Castle, is a castle I think of the White Heron. I'm not sure if that's the literal translation. But this is a beautiful, I took our young son there to see this about 3 months ago now. We got there and we found that in fact they were doing some repairs. And to do the repairs they built a complete building over the building. A massive structure. And then, cherry blossoms, they're all out. Not the cherry blossoms, the Japanese, for the week, all around the castle. That's not gone now. But inside that structure, you can touch the roof. And it's become like a fixation for me. That's the idea of this beautiful thing inside a whole series of layers or cocoons around it. And so I've put together some things just to show how that can work. And they drew the building full size on the outside of this fine screening. What an interesting idea. And what an interesting section. And just to carry that on, you know, you find in old tin sheds around the waterfront some of the most exquisite forms and things. Tasmania, down the Huon River, an 8-metre boat, designed 1927 by Johan Anker, owned by King Harold of Norway, bought by the Albert family, brought out to Australia, now a ruin outside this shed, inside a new one, absolutely beautiful and pristine, is being built by the best builders the country have with the best materials. I just find that incredibly inspiring. And the idea of it being inside this rough old tin shed, this hasn't worked at all. Never mind. But this is the Cutty Sark, and it's in London. And it is sitting also inside its own cocoon. But look at the cocoon. It looks like it's been made of the finest sticks, and it follows the shape of the dry dock in which it sits. I want to quickly show you some work by a wonderful woman in Namibia called Nina Maritz. whose Dutch and I think is probably one of the great architects practicing today. She was born in Namibia, white parents, I think background, maybe it's Dutch perhaps. Her father was an architect, her mother a potter. They moved out to the country. She was brought up out in the back blocks of Namibia. But what a woman. She has made this building, which is like a resource centre you'd call it today, but it's got a library, it's got rooms for teaching, it's got places for meeting. She's made it all out of all the rubbish and the detritus and the stuff that was lying around the city. That's the outside view of this low slung building. That's the entrance through. This is one of the outside outbuildings. Old car tyres, old oil drums for the roof, curved sticks, rough sticks for the structure of this beautiful space frame she's made. Showers. Lift up the bucket on a string, like our old camp showers. Towers for taking the cool air out through the building and out the top. Kitchen, all off-cut broken tiles from all around the place, like Gaudi, and just as poetic. The cool room that's outside of the kitchen, layers of bricks perforated for air to blow through, I think wet surfaces inside. The door insulated, polystyrene, which you can't get rid of that damn stuff, all packed into this double skin door, transparent so you can understand how it's made. The ceiling's beautifully insulated by all these bags of wools and things that she'd found, and left one glazed like that so the story can be told. The rest of them done with the timber slats, the bamboo. Beautiful library, quite a formal space and room. Toilets. I just love it the way she just runs straight through. Doesn't give a damn. It takes courage to do those sorts of stuff. And I just wanted to show you quickly one, I would call that a work of great resourcefulness and poetry of Nina Marreb's. I wouldn't necessarily refer to this next building as that, but it's a house, a small house that I made recently for Philip Searle and Barry Ross, who have been partners for a long time together, and he would be probably, if not the, but one of the great cooks in this country. And I say cooks because there's a lot of chefs, but there's a difference between a cook and a chef. He's a cook, right? And this is the house that they lived in for 20 years. It was a real shack, and it leaked and it was cold and uninsulated and so forth. And I worked on it with them, and we made a new place for them. Perhaps not as good as the old one, but more comfortable. It works on this principle. Big roof, long side facing the sun, north, opening in the roof that lets the light in, and a big wall that runs through the middle, a bit like the boats under the roof that you saw, only not nearly as beautiful. But the wall is rammed earth, sun comes in the winter, heats the wall, and of course it makes the house nice and warm inside. That's basically it. But it also allows the light to come to the south rooms. The time in a building when the platform is in is a magical time. That's the first foothold. That platform, which is horizontal, that allows us to stand and work with a balance and an equilibrium. Try moving on and I've talked with many of you about this, try moving on a sloping surface. It's just really uncomfortable. You don't last for long. But when you actually have the horizontal surface, you can put all the weight through one leg and the muscles stop working, you're in pure compression. That's why the platform is such an important element in architecture. If you read the Zodiac article of Utzin's on platforms and plateaus, it speaks about that really beautifully. And the platform is set up with the 3 struts for the rammed earth wall bracing it, and the wall is made from there. In many ways, the place was never as beautiful as it is here now. And again, it comes back to that thing about the beauty of a ruin. Sometimes buildings, if you're not sure whether they're coming up or going down. That sort of quality is a really wonderful thing, I think. Setting it up, the builder on the right, great friend of mine, and the client, Philip, the great cook, on the left, just checking out the first column, the compression member. And then the structure around the wall completed. What I personally have found as I've got older is that somehow the more elemental, the more, it's not primal what it is, I think, but it's something, the more beautiful something becomes. And I think as you get older, you're more able to see and to do that. I don't know if that's right or not. I just know that when you're young, you've got 1,000 ideas and you try and throw them into the first building and the one thing that you're doing, and it just somehow lacks that simplicity and that clarity. It takes time. Utzin said, very truly, that architecture is an older person's profession because it's a measure of your experience of life. And I think that's actually right. And rammed earth for me, I think, is the nicest compression material. It soaks up the sound, whereas concrete reflects it much stronger. And its carbon footprint is about 0. Whereas you know that concrete's carbon footprint, it represents 10%. So my friend at the CSIRO tells me that concrete represents 10% of the greenhouse gases that are causing us the problems in the world. And that is a really big slice. Steel is not far behind. So I just raise that with you, like materials like this actually are much better in many ways. Of course, concrete is beautiful, like this liquid plastic stone that sets. I mean, it's amazing, but we pay for it. A simple roof over it, a view of the finished house, which is quite a prosaic looking house from the outside, but fully recyclable. All the parts all come apart and can be reused. And the earth wall sits clear inside. Nothing touches it. It doesn't go outside where it loses its heat. It just sits in under this roof. Doors, carpets. They just swing and they just touch the wall. And when they open, they leave the wall clear. No door jambs, no timber, just the carpets. Not an expensive building. A memorial to the people who have lost their lives as volunteers, firefighters, these jokers who come down the cables in helicopters and pick people out of the sea. Many, many citizens of ultimate goodwill. And one piece of stone, 10 metres long and beveled for a few reasons. Something of the vessel in it, river sticks, overlaid symbols, that sort of stuff. Also, there's a lot of people who sleep the night around this part. They can tuck themselves under there and stay dry. And the other end beveled because it contains a great poem by Judith Wright. There. Music by Peter Sculthorpe, a lament, putting this poem of Judith Wright's to music and a woman's voice, unaccompanied. Box made that can be transported as part of the ritual that goes with the stone. It's made from 10,000-year-old Murray River red gum dug up from underneath the river and reused, made by Geoffrey Broadfield, who's a brilliant man. Inside is a great vessel made by Andrew Halford. It can be carried to a service held in the country when they can't come into the city to be at the Great Stone. And the vessel is filled with water and the plants or flowers from the area where the person's life was lost. Sculthorpe's music is embedded in the lid and is scored for harmonica or violin or the woman's voice. That's the stand, that's the box, that's the lid upside down with the music in, the score, and getting down from the city to the 104 degrees of the back of the seat. A new cabin on a boat for a great friend of Pete's and mine, made by the local boat builders, and a seat made by him. Back angle, 104 degrees. Friends. Stumpy, boat builder mate. 50 years I've been friends with this man. We built our little skiff together. He is an amazing character. On his wall, Max, Uncle Max, Dulamunmun, Harrison. He's a great teacher. He understands so much about how this country works. He's a Yuin man from the south coast, and that's his place. He's been a great influence on many of us now for some time. A couple of images to just leave us with. Hunter Valley. A sign nearby says, high wall mining, working with the community. What a crock. And if you read the article in the Herald last week, there are 7,000 gas wells across the Artesian Basin in the southwest of Queensland. This country is being mined to death. And the Hunter Valley is one part of that. Where do we stand politically and socially on those issues? Here's an image. Cooper Pedy, opal mining. And this sums it up for me in many ways. If you look here, and up in here, you'll see little pinholes and little piles of earth, like little insects have been mining it. That's the little punter. That's the little fella in Cooper Pedy who's been taking out the opals by digging and putting things, for many, many years now. The government has let out a mining contract to a big company, and now they are just wiping the area clean. Where do we stand about these things? And I'll just leave that as the last image, because, you know, you can design your way through this world, but sometimes when things happen and we as a society and the people take advantage of it, that's by far the best way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick, and he's finished well before, so we have time for questions. So, questions from the audience, please.
We can talk later.
You know, this is your opportunity because Peter has one.
Stutch has asked, how do we fight the mining issue? Well, I don't know. I just don't know. Obviously, like collectively, like the farmers are really getting irate now about that, as they should be, but as we should be, I think. One reason that we're so adamant in a way that landscape gets commenced in this school is that we have these tools at our disposal to be able to say how the place is actually physically working as a landscape. What keeps it going? What's important? You know, all of those sorts of things. As architects, we tend to sort of ignore those issues, and many of us who are here believe that landscape is actually the first part, always in considering design and architecture, and as it is in the cities to understand why they were. This is why I put them in. So I suppose through studying landscape and bringing that into school is one thing. I think too, by keeping a very tight rein on this university and seeing where its funding's coming from is another, because I think that there's a very good chance that maybe the mining companies are also funding our university. Should that be so? Should we have a position about that? I just think that we have to become sort of politically active with our knowledge of the way certain things work, that's all. Not all, that's a big thing. Nina Maritz, M-A-R-R-I-T-Z. M-A-R-R-I-T-Z. She's very on the ball. I'm sure she's got a website. And she does go and travel to other countries and talk. She'd be a great person to have out here.
More questions?
Did you like the building?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, eh? Very interesting. What I didn't show were the plans of it, you know, and I should have done that because she sited it around two armatures that harbour a beautiful valley that leads down into the city. So that entrance area that you came into looks into this bowl of a garden, and the library and these teaching rooms are the armatures to it. So she has it here too. It's not just about materials. She understands about land and how it encourages us in certain ways to do things. Yeah. I think you'll enjoy her work. She's a good woman, great person.
Any more questions? Okay, I have one question. And I think we are very, very fortunate, first of all, to have such good professors here. But my question was both to Lawrence and yourself, because you had a big and long life in architecture.
Yeah.
And what is your secret of this happy, you come in and you're still happy and enthusiastic, and I look at sometimes the students and they're just sort of down and, not really that passionate. So what has sustained you, both of you?
Well, I've shown what sustained me, but so when you've given the talk, which I missed unfortunately, but
Yeah, well, I mean, in a way we're very parallel, but when Rick went off to Japan, I went off to Europe, and Venice has been my inspiration, and Venice was very like, I agree entirely about the cities and about architects not being separated from other disciplines. Venice is a classic example of that. The Rialto means the high bank. They built on the high bank.
Of course.
Riva on top, and all the things. But Venice, which also didn't, it was a refuge of all the scoundrels.
Yeah.
They ran away from.
still is other words.
Yeah.
Don't you have a house?
Ran away from all the jobs and the busy goods. Yeah, of course. Now, but that idea of nature and city and building is something that it's funny. I went off to Cambridge to study large-scale prefabrication, and I think after 3 weeks I got bored with that. They gave me a supervisor who had designed a new telephone box for England, prefabricated telephone box. Not like the great old ones. The GPO said that they had 104 window panes in the old English telephone box, and he was to do one of 3. That was the brief. Anyway, I got tired of I got interested in the Mediterranean and in meaning and building and those sorts of relationships. So it's really what keeps you going.
Yeah. It's something about things being, well, I mean, timeless is a word that's used probably too often, but good things don't seem to have had a time, do they? They just seem to go on. And Les Murray's description of like perpetual dimension is a very beautiful way of looking at that, I think.
Yeah, it's equivalent to Auden's sort of hymn to limestone in the Mediterranean, and how the limestone has been so behind everything that happens in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, and light reflecting too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like reflecting, as Utz had said, like the skin and the nose.
That's right.
And one other thing I think Rich and I...
Can you hear up the back?
One other thing that Rick and I could agree about is we learned almost nothing at Sydney University.
Totally. Oh, except Lloyd Rees, the painter. Lloyd was there, the teacher, the art teacher.
Yeah, Lloyd Rees was our saviour.
He was.
And we had an extraordinary time. Not only, and I think that's where my love of Venice came, because Lloyd could just come in and talk about Venice and Tintoretto and how they influenced him, and yet how he could still greatly, so it's not a question of, sort of European flu. He understood how it influenced him in Australia and how he painted it and so on. And so Lloyd Rees was a great thing. I mean, we learned from Lloyd Rees, and we learned the odd thing from a few other people. But the idea of landscape, architecture and city, no, we didn't learn anything about that.
Nothing. No. I thought I should tell him the story about George Molnar and you and the swimming race.
Yes.
we, like Lauren said, we didn't have great teachers with the exception of Lloyd Rees, the painter, who was marvellous, and, as Lauren said, our touchstone. But in our last year, we okay for time?
Yep.
In our last year, we had George Molnar, who was this incredibly dignified Hungarian Australian with his hair brushed back and an immaculate bird's eye patterned grey suit, pressed, shoes polished, and a dignified way of walking head up, like he almost had half a pound of bad fish under his nose, which is the way that they describe Charles de Gaulle, I think. And but we used to have arguments with him. He was a great cartoonist, and he did understand certain things. Maybe we were a bit young, but Lawrence was always having a bit of an argument with him. And there one day, there was a studio situation, and Lawrence thumped the top of his desk and Molnar was standing there like this. Lawrence said, "That's ridiculous, Mr. Molnar. I'll challenge you to a swimming race." Because Molnar used to swim in 7 Shillings Beach, Double Bay, every morning.
Very
Right?
small crossies.
Right. And Lawrence was a great swimmer. And Molnar drew himself back and said, "Oh, Neil," he said, "very well, Neil. We will have a swimming race. What would you like?" And Lawrence jumped in. He said, 400 metres butterfly. Molnar put down his pencil and he said, No, Neil. We will have a real swimming race. 7 miles.
So I withdrew after that.
Withdrew defeated.
Yeah. He did, Rick, you've got to mention, he did this incredible cartoon when the Opera House was opened. I don't
No, don't speak to them because they can't hear.
Molnar did this incredible cartoon when the Opera House was open. And you see the Opera House and people walking up and it said, "As I was going to the fair, I met a man who was not there."
Oh,
To the one, reflecting on it. He was a huge supporter of it.
he was, yeah.
And
he was a very witty man, wasn't
Yeah, and he used to get us to draw up bits of the Opera House to defend it against all the attackers and so on.
he? Yeah. And he was a funny guy. He must have been 50 some. Oh, we're right? Yeah, okay. Well, these talks can go on later.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody, and let's go. Thanks for doing that.
That's okay.
It just runs by itself, does it?
Yeah.
Once you get it set up.
When the conversation started spreading, I think my camera work got
Good on you.
a bit out of joint.